Lesson 3, Section 3. In this presentation, we'll be introducing the dative case under nouns, pronouns, and adjectives, and then we'll be talking about uninflected words, such as adverbs, prepositions, and particles. The dative case usually indicates an indirect object, that is, to or for whom something is done. For instance, kai lege tois anthropos. Here, kai is the Greek word for and, basically. Lege is the third person singular form of the verb lega, I say, speak, tell. And tois anthropos is the plural masculine dative of anthropos. So we're talking about people, and it's in the dative. We might translate this as, and she says to the people. This is a line from one of the Gospels, I believe, about the woman Jesus has met at the well. She goes back to tell the people what he has told her. And we see here that in Greek, we have no preposition, which we will talk about later in this presentation. In English, however, to translate it, we do use the preposition to. We often use prepositions like to or for in English to capture the fact that we're talking about an indirect object, that is, to or for whom something is done. And that's the dative case. We'll see some examples of it, some further examples, in the readings associated with this presentation. Uninflected words. Fortunately, Greek does have uninflected parts of speech, such as adverbs, particles, and prepositions. We'll talk about each of these in turn. In English, adverbs can be formed by adding ly to an adjective. For instance, wisely. Wise, the adjective, and this ly suffix, which changes that adjective into an adverb. In Greek, adverbs are often formed by taking the stem of an adjective and adding os, omega, and sigma. For instance, let's take the adjective sapos, sape, sapon, the three different genders of the adjective there, the nominative singular in each. And we can get the stem, of course, by dropping the ending os, a, on to get sap. That gives us our stem. And then we just add the omega sigma, sapos, to get our adverb wisely. As in English, however, Greek has many irregular adverbs, many of which are interrogative, which means they have to do with questions. They're adverbs getting at how things are done, when things are done, where things are done, that sort of thing. These are interrogative adverbs, often the first words of their respective sentences. For instance, pou, which means where. Pos means how. In Greek, there are also enclitic adverbs, and enclitics are actually a whole class of words. I'll tell you about them in a second. They are words that affect the accentuation of preceding words. It's really a formal definition. It doesn't really tell you what they mean, but it does tell you how they behave. And we'll see some examples in just a second. It is enclitic's own lack of accentuation that distinguishes them from their non-enclitic counterparts. So how do you tell an enclitic from a non-enclitic? Well, it's accentuation. Enclitics lack accentuation of their own, typically, and also do strange things to the accentuation of words that come before them. For instance, let's look at those words we just looked at, these adverbs of place, where, and this adverb of manner, how. These are interrogative adverbs, pou and pos. And we have enclitic versions of these that actually mean different things. So, pou with no accent means somewhere. Pos with no accent means somehow. So again, the interrogative adverbs, the non-enclitic forms, which have their own meanings, have the accents, these circumflexes on the ultimas there, and the enclitic forms do not. And that is going to be how we're going to tell these apart. And again, the difference in meanings is clear. One means where, pou means where, and pou means somewhere. Pos means how. Pos without the accent means somehow. Prepositions. In English, prepositions are used to indicate relationships between things. For instance, the words of a man. This preposition of indicates a certain kind of relationship between the words and a man. Here, it indicates that the first noun, the words, belongs to the second, a man. The noun that follows a preposition is called the object of that preposition. So in the English sentence or phrase, the words of a man, the object would be a man. That would be the object of the preposition. This is not quite as important in English as it is in Greek. We will see why. In English, the object of a preposition is in the objective case, naturally. It's an object, goes into the objective case. It makes no difference to me. The preposition is to, the object of that preposition is me. It's a form of the first person singular pronoun I, and it has changed form because we've put it into the objective case. And all prepositions will take objects in the objective case in English. In Greek, many of the functions of prepositions are taken over by the inflection of nouns. We saw this in the dative, actually. In English, we use the preposition to or for. With indirect objects, Greek can just use the dative. Let's look at another example. Hoi lagoi anthropou. So we just saw the English phrase, the words of a man. This is the Greek equivalent of that. Hoi lagoi, the words anthropou, of a man. All three of those English words are contained in this single Greek word, which happens to be in the genitive. We would apply a, the indefinite article, because it might make sense in the context, but also this is how Greek usually uses nouns used by themselves. So again, we have no preposition in this Greek version, whereas we do in the English, the words of a man. Here it's just two nouns in Greek, back to back, plus the definite article there. However, Greek does still make frequent use of prepositions. Prepositions are still very important in Greek. They're not quite as important as they are in English, but they're also trickier. Because unlike in English, prepositions in Greek can take objects in three different cases. If you remember, in English, the objects of prepositions go into the objective case, just that one case. In Greek, they can appear in the genitive, the dative, or the accusative. Some prepositions always govern the same case. That means the prepositions always take objects in the same case. Examples like these are ek or ex, depending on the letter of the word that follows it. You might use ek rather than ex or vice versa. This preposition is always followed by an object in the genitive case, and it's always going to mean out of. En, another very important preposition, is always going to be followed by an object in the dative case. It's always going to govern the dative case, and it means in or also among. Ace plus accusative means into. You can think of ace as just meaning into and always taking an object in the accusative case. So these are really static relationships. Each of these prepositions is always going to take each of these cases. Ek, always going to take genitive. En, always going to take dative. Ace is always going to take accusative. But other prepositions govern different cases depending on their meanings. For example, let's take the preposition epé. When followed by an object in the genitive case, it's going to mean on. When followed by an object in the dative case, it's going to mean for. And when followed by an object in the accusative case, this preposition is going to mean onto rather than on. So one preposition, epé, with different meanings depending on the case of the object that it takes. So this is one of the reasons why we have to pay careful attention to the cases that nouns are in. It's because with prepositions, prepositional phrases, the meaning of that preposition is going to vary depending on the case of the word that follows it. Lastly, particles. Particles is a term that includes what in English are called conjunctions. Conjunctions are words that really connect things together, connect sentences together, connect words and sentences together. They conjoin things. They connect them. It's really a good synonym. Kai, the conjunction kai, means and in English. Again, we would probably call and a conjunction and kai a particle, though terminology is not always consistent in Greek. These are just small words, really, these particles, that are not inflected. That's the important thing. You will always see kai in this form. U or uk or uk, depending on the letter that starts the next word, is going to be not or no. Obviously, this is very important, this particle, this negativing particle. However, Greek has particles for which English has no equivalent, such as ara, which is something I call an audible question mark, that is usually not translated. So for instance, ara lege tois anthropos. Here we have this particle, ara, the beginning of the sentence, and we have a semicolon, which you probably notice as well, which in Greek functions as a question mark. And we're not going to translate this ara except by putting this in the form of question. So if we didn't have the ara and didn't have the semicolon, it would be basically what we saw before. She says to the people. But with the ara and with the semicolon, we're going to make a question out of this. Is she telling the people? This is a variation of the sentence we saw before. And this is one of the particles for which English has no equivalent. Sometimes that will happen. For further reading, you can look at page 45 on adverbs, 56 to 59 for prepositions, and 207 to 212 for particles. Thank you very much.